Good Saturday morning, everyone, and welcome to week two of the Countdown to College Football Kickoff Show. Kenneth here, senior analyst for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and it's always a pleasure to be with you each and every week. I have you for the next 59 minutes, so let's jump right into the games that we're going to be breaking down for week two. Just a quick thought on some of the games, once again, from week one that we saw. Georgia looked absolutely dominant against Clemson. Vanderbilt out of the Southeastern Conference getting a major um, program win there for head coach Clark Lee over Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech went into that game almost a two-touchdown favorite in that ball game. Not as all well with the SEC coming out of week one. We saw the Florida Gators absolutely get boat raced at home by the Miami Hurricanes. We saw LSU come up short there in Las Vegas against USC, and we saw Notre Dame come out of College Station with a very hard-fought win over Texas A&M. Penn State had a fantastic game against West Virginia, winning that game 34-12. Some other games that we were just kind of keeping an eye on from last week. Syracuse looked solid against Ohio. That rush defense did not, though. That is something that could wave its ugly head coming into this game. Oregon, Michigan got wins last week, but did not look crisp in their contest. Same can be said for Arizona. Winning against New Mexico 61-39, that's a lot more points than you want to give up in that week one contest. But the theme of the college football season, just win that week. Florida State continues their slide as they lose their second straight conference game, this time at home to Boston College. Absolutely dominated on the ground once again. That's a major concern if you are a Florida State fan coming into the rest of your early part of your schedule. So a lot of things to clean up there for FSU. And let's jump into our week two contest here. We have on our featured game slate UTSA taking on Texas State. And the reason why we selected this game, this could be a potential group of five representative for the college football playoffs. So always want to keep an eye out on any of those matchups as we get ready to go into conference play. So you want to get those big time out of conference wins wherever you can, especially early on in the season. The Cyhawk game annually being played against, featuring Iowa State versus Iowa. This game is in Iowa City this year. Expect a fantastic home crowd there for Iowa as always. Coming up in the evening slate, the Tennessee Volunteers travel just a few hundred miles east, heading over to Charlotte to do battle against the North Carolina State Wolfpack. This is a big SEC versus ACC battle. We talked about it just a few moments ago, how SEC really had an opportunity to come out of these first 2 weeks with an opportunity not just to get 4 bids, but if it broke correctly, could see 5 bids. Given what we saw last week, I think it's safe for me to feel like we're going to see 4 bids out of the SEC. We'll see how the Big Ten does as they look to get 4 teams as well. Then coming up a Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup. The Colorado Buffaloes, led by Coach Prime, led by Shedeur Sanders, traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska to take on freshman phenom quarterback Dylan Raiola, and that group led by head coach Matt Rule. And then the game of the week, the Texas Longhorns out of the Southeastern Conference head up to the Big House in beautiful Ann Arbor, Michigan. Whether we talked about it on the previous show and the podcast, weather in Michigan a little bit cooler today as they face the defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. Let's take a look at those updated betting lines because that is something we're always going to be intrigued with. And looking at those current betting lines, and I'm also give the betting splits when we get into those games as well. As you can see on the screen here, UTSA only a 1-point underdog there in San Marcos to the Texas State Bobcats there. The Tennessee Vols are a 8.5-point favorite currently. As we look at the big board here in that matchup versus NC State, folks, that line got as high as Tennessee -10. So we've seen in the past 24 plus hours a little bit of buyback there for the Wolfpack. Up next, Colorado versus Nebraska. That game did touch 7.5 briefly. We've seen some Colorado money absolutely come in, and now that line currently sits with the Cornhuskers with a less than a touchdown favorite there at home. Iowa State at Iowa. The Hawkeyes currently sit at a 3-point favorite. That game did touch 3.5 in some places. Got as low as 2.5. So we think as we get ready to for that game to kick off here in a couple of hours, that line's probably going to be settled in right at that 3 spot. So depending on where you got this game, you could have gotten a 1-point advantage one way or another. So always shop for the best number and be quick to react when that number moves to whichever way that you see this game going. And then finally, the Texas Longhorns are a 7-point road favorite there over Michigan. We saw Michigan struggle quite a bit there last week against Fresno State, but that defense did not struggle. So offensive concerns there for Michigan. We'll see if that defense is able to hold up against this Texas Longhorn aerial attack here later on this afternoon. All right, I said we would get into the betting splits here and just some quick thoughts on these contests. UTSA versus Texas State. And as I look at the betting splits for this contest, we have, let's see, what are we looking at here? Okay. Having a little issue with the mouse here, so bear with me. Still early in the season for the computer as well. So here we go. So 80% of the tickets are for for Texas State. So why that jumps out to me is because only 60% of the money is going towards Texas State. So volume, Texas State, actual dollars, a little bit more heavy on UTSA. And that's why we see that line creeping down to where it's probably, I would not be surprised if we get this game to be a pick 'em by the time we get to kickoff here. As far as the over under, if that's something you're interested in, that line currently sits with the over under at 61 and a half. 70% of the money is to the over. However, only, I'm sorry, 70% of the tickets are to the over. Only 54% of the money is on the over. For UTSA, for them to pull off this victory later later on today, gonna have to get production from their passing game and absolutely keep the pressure on UTSA in this contest. What you don't want to do is get into a matchup where you can't control the pace of the game. And for UTSA, their running back, Robert Henry, 5'9", 200-pound senior there out of Mississippi, is going to have to give some more production on the ground. Really didn't see a lot last week against Kennesaw State. Only 6 carries for 30 yards. Gonna definitely have to see much more production in this ball game as um, Owen McCown had a really solid game last week. 28 for 38, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, no INTs. For Texas State, they're going to look to get their quarterback Jordan McLeod going. 6 foot, 200-pound senior there out of Tampa, Florida. His game last week also solid as well. 21 of 30, 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 INT. Moving on to our next contest. Iowa State in Iowa. Like I said, love this matchup. Love that we get this matchup every year. Hopefully, even with realignment, we'll still continue to get this game because it is um, important in that state. As you know, there's no NFL football, so these are the two big time teams in that state. So as I said, that line sits currently with Iowa as a 3-point home favorite. 84% of the tickets are on Iowa. 85% of the money is on Iowa. And that's why that while that line touched 2.5 briefly, it instantly saw buyback there for the Iowa Hawkeyes when they're playing at home. So that's something to keep a mind on. Both the public and the professional bettors are liking what they saw last week in Iowa in this matchup. I talked about it in the podcast. Phil Parker, defensive coordinator for Iowa, one of the best in all of college football. No disrespect to the defensive coordinator there for Ohio State and Jim Knowles, Glenn Schumann there at the University of Georgia. But what those two defensive coaches are working with is premier defensive talent, parade All-Americans, 5 stars all over that defense. Don't see that with Iowa, but what you do see are teams that are completely fundamentally sound and absolutely in the right place on all of their defense assignments. So let's take a look at those splits here for this contest. As far as the over under, that over under, and we know last year we had a lot of fun betting our overs. Folks, that over is at 35 and a half. So if you want to take the under in this game, you definitely want to get it before it goes down to 35. You don't want to be snake bitten by that hook. It's there for a reason. It's there to either help you or slice you. So 53% of the money is to the under. I'm sorry, 53% of the tickets is to the under. 48% of the money is to the under. So we are seeing some money with this with this particular contest to where this game could potentially go over with a defensive or special team score there late in late in the second half. So that's something to keep an eye on. I don't think we're just going to easily be able to bet the um, over. I'm sorry, bet the unders this year when it comes to the Iowa Hawkeyes. Quarterback Kate McNamara looked healthy in that contest last week, and this offense, new offensive coordinator as well. Nepotism out the window. We're gonna see a different style of offense there in Iowa City. Kurt Ferentz is back on the sideline this week. He was suspended last week for um, a recruiting violation involving Kate McNamara, I should say. 1 game suspension. You get that out of the way early, and it's against an opponent that you should be able to cruise past. They were able to do that last week. Let's take a look at the quarterbacks in this matchup. For Iowa State, quarterback Rocco Beck had a solid performance last week. 20 for 26, 267 yards, 2 touchdowns. His counterpart, Cade McNamara, we talked about it, looking healthy in that contest. We get who the opponent was, but it was important just to see Iowa be able to find the end zone with their offense. Cade went 21 for 31, 251 yards, 3 touchdowns in that contest. For Iowa State, they're going to have to find a way to get this running game going. Abu Samo, Sam, Sama the third, 5'11", 210 pounds there, right out of Des Moines, Iowa, needs to have a big game against this Iowa rush defense. Last week, really struggled against North Dakota. Only 5 carries, 36 yards in that contest. He's going to need a bigger production if the Iowa State Hawkeyes want to stay in this contest and not be one-dimensional, because if Phil Parker can read your mail and know that you're going to be throwing virtually on every down, he's going to be able to cook up some defensive schemes to where your quarterback's not going to know where that coverage is rolling to, and could easily throw an interception in this contest. For the Iowa State Cyclones, their wide receiver Jalen Noel has to have another big time game. We saw him against North Dakota last week, 8 receptions, 135 yards. Did have that long 54-yard reception last week and did have 1 touchdown. He's going to have to put up similar type numbers today, because I don't know if our state has a true number 2 yet early on in the season. If we look at their numbers, yeah, Higgins had 5 receptions, 75 yards in that game, but he's going to go up against much better competition this week. So can Rocco Beck get those 2 talented wide receivers going? Flipping it over to the other side, running back Caleb Johnson, 6 foot, 225-pound battering ram there out of Hamilton, Ohio. Last week, 11 carries, 119 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have that long run of 64 yards. I think in this matchup, he's going to probably need to be over that 20 to 25 carry range, just really taking some of the pressure off of McNamara in this contest. And if he's able to do that, along with his running mate, um, Kamari Moulton, 5'9", 200-pound freshman there out of the Fort Lauderdale, Florida area. So if you're looking at the game script here, those 2 running backs combined for 30 carries, we're looking at about 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. They're probably going to need to be around that number combined this week. If you can get that kind of production out of those 2 running backs this week, that 1-2 combo, to where now you can start to wear out this Iowa State defense in the first half. I'm going to give a stat that I always kind of like to monitor in these matchups. How many rush attempts does each team have at the end of the first half? Now, provided there are no turnovers, the team that has the most rush attempts in this game in the first half should set themselves up quite well to leave this contest with a victory. And another matchup that I'm really excited about, and another shout out to my good friend Julie Vols, one of our favorite Tennessee fans. Her and my good friend Matlock host a weekly show there down on the beautiful Emory Coast on 850 The Ticket. And Julie, we're gonna be at this game watching your Vols. Got a top rated prospect there in James Pierce Jr. Want to see if he looks the part of a projected top 10 pick in next year's draft. From a body type standpoint, he reminds me of another former, uh, at the time, big big eight. Um, Alden Smith had a was off to a fantastic career there with the 49ers before some personal demons got in his way. But if James Pierce Jr. can continue to ascend and play to the caliber of talent that we expect him to, expect that this young man could hear his name called very early on in the upcoming draft. So, Julie, let's talk. Julie Vols, let's talk about your Tennessee Vols in this matchup. Easy to say that three times fast. All right, let's take a look at the betting splits here. 89% of the tickets are going to Tennessee in this matchup. So the public is absolutely loving Tennessee in this matchup. 85% of the money is on Tennessee in this matchup. The professional bettors are loving the Vols in this matchup. Now you ask, why did we see a little bit buyback when that number hit 10? 10 is a key number in the betting world. Think about it. You get a touchdown and a field goal, that's your 10 points. You want to make sure that you're under that key number there. So that's why you saw a little bit of buyback there. I would not be surprised by the time we get to kickoff that that number is not sitting directly on the number 9, where the Vols are a 9-point favorite in this ball game. So Julie says that she always has Rocky Top queued up for this matchup. We're gonna take a little bit of a breakdown here when it when we get ready to talk about this matchup. Let's look at the over under because that number sits at 61. 70% of the tickets are to the over. 72% of the money is to the over. That's why that number's continued to creep up from where we saw it in the opening. Let's take a look at the matchups here because talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but want to dive deeper into it. Nico, freshman quarterback there for Tennessee, looked the part last week against Chattanooga. It's not so much the yards, it's not so much the touchdowns that I looked at. It is the ball placement. And Josh Heupel praised this young quarterback in his accuracy and in his ability to fit the ball in tight spaces in the opener. Now, he's got a big test coming up against this Wolfpack defense. Flip it over. Dave Dorn, after that game against Western Carolina, his comments in the postgame, you never apologize for winning a football game. But the performance has left the Wolfpack as a underdog, as we have seen this number continue to move on the week. Protecting the quarterbacks. We just talked about it. These teams these two teams feature two of the most experienced offensive lines in college football when you gauge it by game starts. Believe it or not, only Florida State and Oklahoma State have more combined starts by their offensive line than Tennessee coming into the season, while NC State came in as the eighth most experienced offensive line by the number of starts in the FBS. Tennessee is anchored by center Cooper Mays. And folks, Cooper Mays is one of the best centers, not only in the Southeastern Conference, but all of college football. He's going to be pushed this year by the Washington transfer down in Alabama, Parker Bransford, as um, to see who's probably going to be first team SEC at the center spot on the offensive line. Here's one of the craziest stats you're going to hear about Cooper Mays. He's starting his fourth straight season, and Mays has not allowed a sack in 15 straight games. If NC State cannot get pressure on Nico in this contest, it could be a very long evening for the Wolfpack. Brew McCoy suffered that season-ending injury last year against South Carolina. He's back. Dante Thornton, who transferred from Oregon, he's ready to go. Chris Brazil, the second, is also ready to go for Tennessee in this matchup. But the young man that I highlighted in this contest for Tennessee at the wide receiver spot is one Squirrel White. And why did I really kind of highlight him in this contest? Folks, last week, Squirrel White, very limited action, 2 receptions, 22 yards. Could care less about that. This young man is absolutely explosive with the ball in his hands. And you're talking about 5'10", 170-pound senior, I'm sorry, 70-pound junior there out of the Birmingham, Alabama area. Squirrel White has great short area explosiveness. And when I talk about that, he's not like a Debo Samuels where he's a running back playing wide receiver. He's he's fast, but he's also quick. If you get the ball in his hand in space, that's where you start to see matchup problems. And Josh Heupel, really good job of being able to scheme up wide receivers to get open. Go back 2 years ago when the Tennessee Vols finally got over the snide and beating Alabama for the first time in 15, 14 years, I think, that streak got up to. Nick Saban going into that game had not lost to Tennessee as the head coach of Alabama until that matchup. And what did Josh Heupel do in that contest? He really focused on getting those wide receivers in the slot matched up with either a linebacker or a safety. And what every wide receiver absolutely drools over at night is the possibility of having a linebacker who's not used to dropping into those areas and trying to cover a wide receiver one-on-one with a lot of real estate to do it in. You basically make that guy miss, and then you go to try to hit your head on the goalpost. I think in this matchup, you're going to see Squirrel White lined up all over the place. He could line up next to Nico, sidecar either to the left or the right of the quarterback, motion either to the short slot or go behind the quarterback, get freed up almost like a modified wheel route, and then basically have a choice route of if he's got the linebacker on him, depending on what the other routes are, whether he breaks inside or a quick pivot to the outside. If Nico hits him in stride, like we saw a little bit last week, this is where Squirrel White could absolutely put up some major numbers. So while all the attention for North Carolina State this week might be on Thornton and Brew McCoy, I expect Squirrel White to have a big time game in this matchup. For NC State, because we got to talk about the Wolfpack in this matchup. McCall coming over from Coastal Carolina, playing in a new offense and a new system. Took a little time to get his feet under him last week. 26 for 40, 318 yards, three touchdowns, the one INT, completed 65%. So solid numbers there. And folks, he's got one target that he absolutely loved, and that's wide receiver Kevin Concepcion, the 5'11", 190-pound sophomore there, playing in front of his home folks and friends and family there in Charlotte, North Carolina. 9 receptions, 121 yards. Folks, let me give you the defensive game plan here for Tennessee. If he has those same kind of numbers, your defensive coordinator absolutely needs to be fired at the end of the day, because if you look at the rest of the receiving options there for North Carolina State, whether it's the tight end, whether it's the other wide receivers, you're looking at a combined from last week 13 receptions. So he basically almost single-handedly outdid the rest of his counterparts there. If I'm Tennessee, I am doubling him as soon as he steps on the field. I'm going to force McCall to absolutely beat us with another wide receiving threat. And if he is able to get 300 yards and his number one target is not a focal point in this ball game, you tip your hat to the opposing head coach and Dave Dorn, and you say, "You got us. Good luck on the rest of the season. God bless you. You got us." But there's no way you do not force this team to beat you left-handed in this matchup. Up next, the Colorado Buffaloes. As I talked about, they will be traveling to beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska for this old Big 8 showdown. Now it's a Big 12 versus Big 10 showcase showdown here. And last week we kind of got some notes on Colorado, some that we liked and some that we didn't like. So let's spend a few minutes talking about Colorado here. What did we like about Colorado last week? Well, the first thing that we liked was, for the most part, took care of the ball. Now, Shador had a bad INT there, but that's going to happen from time to time. The passing stats were once again off the charts. 26 for 34, 445 yards. I'm sorry, 13.1 yards per attempt there. Folks, that's some of the same numbers that we were seeing from Heisman Trophy winner Jalen Daniels last year. The rushing offense, it's still a problem for Colorado. 23 rush attempts, 59 yards against North Dakota State last week. That's not good. Now, another positive we saw from Colorado, we did see the penalties come down. This team averaged over 8 penalties per game last year, only 3 last week. So we like that if you're a Colorado fan. What we don't like are the two numbers that I'm about to give out here. 157 yards rushing allowed to North Dakota State in that contest. That's not going to win you a lot of ball games once you step up in weight class in competition. Another thing that was concerning is this Colorado pass defense was not good against North Dakota State. 20 for 26, 292 yards, 11.2 yards per attempt allowed. That's LSU bad defense last year. When you're giving up over 11 yards per attempt, you're giving up explosive plays in the pass game. That's not a recipe for success going into this contest. Now, what did we not learn? Well, we did not learn a lot about Nebraska last week. Nebraska in a blowout win against UTEP, and quite honestly, if you put North Dakota State and UTEP on the field against each other, I would not be surprised if North Dakota State won that game. So, not a lot of great takeaways from that contest. Dylan Raiola in a week one game where the talent was outmatched against U, UTEP, he looked the part as the freshman phenom quarterback that we heard he would be. So Dylan Raiola last week, 19 for 27, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns, very limited action. Let's get into where the numbers are for this line, for this contest. Nebraska currently sits as a 6.5 point favorite there. The let's see, getting okay, here we go. 73% of the tickets are on Nebraska. 62% of the money is on Nebraska in this contest. That is quite fascinating that we saw that line dip below 7, given those two numbers. So we've seen a little bit of buyback once that number got to a key number of 7 there for uh, Colorado. The over under at 55 and a half, 84% of the tickets are to the over. 88% of the money is to the over as well. So let's get into the previews here. For Colorado, we absolutely love Shador, love Travis Hunter, the two-way star there. But this contest is got to come down to, can Colorado get out of the 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, put 2 tight ends on the field, or put a 6th offensive lineman on the field and try to get some semblance of a running game. You can't just continue to drop back 40, 50 times and allow your quarterback to absorb that kind of pressure on every single snap. You got to take some of the pressure off of them. We like the fact that you at least attempted to run the ball, but you can't run it from the spread because your offensive line is not good enough to do that. Getting some 12 personnel, and just take some of the pressure off of Shador with the running game here, because if you continue to just constantly put the ball in the air, what's going to happen is you're going to have some very short possessions, some 4, maybe 5 play possessions. You're going to turn the ball back over to Nebraska, and this is where Nebraska absolutely has to make you pay. It's with the run game. If Nebraska in the first half, and this is a stat, folks, I'm just going to keep going back to because it is time tested and time proven. First half rushing attempts. If Matt Rule doesn't try to get into a, let's see if quarterback, my freshman quarterback, as good as your quarterback who's projected to be a high draft pick in next year's draft, if he doesn't allow himself to get into that mindset and looks at those rushing numbers that North Dakota State was able to amass on this Colorado defense, if that number is over 18 in the first half by Nebraska, folks, we could be in for a absolute beatdown in this contest. But if Dylan Raiola is in that 20 attempt range in the first half, then we could have a shootout on our hands, and The one thing you really don't want to do is you don't really want to get into a shootout with Colorado. Their wide receivers are absolutely phenomenal. So if you're Nebraska, you want to get a lead in the first half, take the air out the ball in the second half. Bill Parcells taught us this a long time ago. The more physical team at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball wins the games more time than not. If that is time tested and time proven, we will see a matchup to where Nebraska gets a big time win there over their rival, the Colorado Buffaloes. And now our game of the week. We're going to spend a few extra minutes on this game, even more so than what we did on the podcast, because this is absolutely delicious as a matchup as we're going to get early on in the season. The one thing that realignment did give us, we don't have to wait for these games in bowl games where guys are opting out now. You got two big time brand name programs, probably two of the top 10 as far as brands go in college football. The Texas Longhorns, now of the Southeastern Conference, the University of Michigan, the reigning national champions, come into this matchup where if I remember seeing the stat right, this is the first time the University of Texas will be playing in Ann Arbor in program history. Folks, we need more games like this. Um, Hopefully, we'll get Michigan uh, down in Austin at some point. You want to just continue to see these big time programs play each other. And with the expanded playoffs, a loss in the early season does not uh, eliminate you from making the playoffs. Let's take a look at some of the things that we learned from Texas absolutely blowing out Colorado State last week. Quinn Ewers looked fine in that contest. We're not going to really wax poetically about those numbers. 20 for 27, 260, three touchdowns, one INT. The defense, I mean, against an undermatched Colorado State, performed solid. Uh, didn't give up anything on the ground. You're looking at on 32 rush attempts, Texas gave up 118 yards, 3.7 yards per carry. That's okay. The pass defense against an overmatched Colorado State Rams team, 13 for 24, 74 yards, 3.1 yards per attempt. Did force two INTs. Respectable. The Texas run game, we're gonna grade this on a big bell curve here. 41 rush attempts, 190 yards, 4.6 yards per attempt. So Sark was just trying to test out his new running game with those two running backs uh, going down early on in the pre-camp. So looking at where some of those rush carries went, Jaden Blue and Jarrett Gibson, 11 and 10 carries respectively. So about 21 carries from your two primary backs there. Solid performance, and that's really all you're trying to see from that standpoint. As far as Michigan, what did we learn about Michigan versus Fresno State? Some very concerning numbers. Michigan does not have the same caliber of offensive line, and folks, it was foolish to expect they would. They lost one of the most experienced offensive lines we've ever seen in college football. Um, Usually you would see this from teams like BYU, where guys do their 2-year Mormon mission and then come back and, you know, you're not dealing with 18 and 19-year-olds. You're dealing with 22, 23-year-olds with families who are much more physically developed um, from just that standpoint. Michigan not only had seniors on the offensive line, not just fifth year seniors, but they had the COVID super seniors. And nothing wrong with that. I'm just pointing out the fact that you lose all of that cohesiveness, all of that experience off of that offensive line. And it really, really showed last week. So let's take a look at what Michigan did last week from a running standpoint. 34 carries, 148 yards, 4.4 yards per carry. The loss of Blake Corum is absolutely being being felt there in Ann Arbor. Uh, Donovan Edwards is not a traditional Michigan running back. He wants to bounce everything outside. He's looking for the home run. What we saw from Blake Corum last year, and since Blake has been there, is the ability to get those tough yards, those 3, 4 yards when you absolutely just need to move the chains. What's even probably more concerning for Michigan going into this matchup where they're going to need to score points. The Wolverines don't have a quarterback. Alex Orji, I told Michigan fans this last year, and they wanted to have me tarred and feathered when I said Alex Orji is not a quarterback. Well, 1 for 2 last week, 3 yards. Okay, there we go. Davis Warren, uh, 15 for 25, 118 yards, 4.7 yards per attempt. If you're telling me 4.7 yards per rush attempt, that's good. 4.7 per pass attempt, that's Pop Warner. Okay. One touchdown, one INT. His QBR was 33. Folks, um, QBR average is 50. When you're in the 30s, not good. He he there's one target that he liked last week, and that's tight end Colston Loveland, a potential first team All American, not just All Conference tight end there. He had 8 receptions. The rest of the team had 8 receptions last week. He had 87 yards. You can do the math. The rest of the wide receivers had less than 40 yards. Not good there. And we talked about this defense is going to be lights on out under new defensive coordinator to Michigan, but not a new defensive coordinator in Don Wink Martindale. Wink has been building defense a lot longer than most people have been walking the planet that's probably listened to this podcast. Wink is from the NFL system, and he's got a fantastic corner there in Will Johnson. The rest of the cornerbacks are going to get tested this week. And the reason why that score is just a little bit misleading, folks, I'm going to give you the halftime score here. Michigan was up 10-3. At the end of the third quarter, they were up 13-3. Those 17 points there in the fourth quarter, 7 of those came on a pick six with about 4 minutes left to go by Will Johnson as Fresno State was driving 86 yards back to the house there by Will Johnson. That's why he's one of the best defensive backs in all of college football. Let's get into the preview a little bit here. Quinn Ewers is going to have to get help from his interior offensive line. And I'm talking about the 2 guards and the center, because what they're facing is one of the best interior duos in all of college football in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They will be looking to push the pocket, and Wink is going to design some very unique blitzes there to where he's going to try to confuse Quinn Ewers as often as possible in this matchup. What can't happen for the University of Michigan is they cannot fall behind early. If Texas goes up by 2 scores early on in this ball game, you now put all the pressure on former walk-on quarterback Davis Warren in this matchup. I don't see Michigan being able to play a hurry-up throwing style matchup against Texas. So it's imperative for Michigan to get the lead early and stay connected throughout the first half, because If they don't, this game could get really ugly in the big house. Few quick facts and figures before we get out of here on this matchup. Michigan has won 23 consecutive home games, the third longest winning streak in school history, and the longest since 1969 through 1973. Last season, Texas snapped Alabama's 21 game home winning streak. Texas had 10 receivers catch a pass in the first half against Colorado State, and Ewers has had a touchdown pass in 14 consecutive games. Michigan ranked number one all time in college football wins with 1,005 victories. Texas sits fourth all time with 949. That's not going to play any part in today's matchup. What will play a matchup is, can Texas handle that environment there in Ann Arbor, get the lead early, and if they are able to do so, could be leaving Michigan with a 2-0 record and getting ready to head into conference play here really, really soon. So that's a quick look at the betting lines and where we currently sit. Now, let's take a look at some other key games that we're watching this week. And a game that I really, really do have my eye on, and my good friend Matlock, who's a big Auburn fan. We just talked about his wonderful co-host there, Julie Vols. Matlock, your Auburn Tigers welcome in the Cal Golden Bears, folks, now out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, or as Matlock likes to call it, the All Coastal Conference. Um, Folks, the reason why I'm highlighting this game is because last year in in Berkeley, Cal absolutely dominated this matchup, but did not win the game. A lot of field goals there by Auburn, but was able to get the win. This game is this year being played in Jordan Hare Stadium there on the beautiful plains there of Auburn, Alabama. Folks, that line has dripped down from where it opened at 13. That line is now down to 12 for the Auburn Tigers. And in some spots, that line is ticked down even further. You could find that line as low as 11 in some public shops there. So once again, always shop for the best number. And folks, how is this number dropping when 85% of the tickets are on the Auburn Tigers? 89% of the money is on the Auburn Tigers. Yet we see that line dip below the key number of 14, which it never hit. It is dipped below 13. It's on the drop here again, down to a consensus minus 12 for Auburn across the board. There's something fishy about this line here, and I said in the podcast that Auburn is going to get tested by this Cal running game. They saw this young man last year in Jalen Ott, who I talked about last week. 14 carries, only 49 yards, 2 touchdowns. We know that he's going to be saddled up and ready to ride here in this contest. That line looked awfully fishy to me. In another SEC matchup, Kentucky, South Carolina. Kentucky, that line has been Kentucky minus 8.5 or as high as minus 10. So like that matchup, 76% of the money is still on Kentucky. 83% of the bets are on the Wildcats as they welcome in conference rival, the Gamecocks out of South Carolina. South Alabama, a 2-point road favorite there as they travel to the Buckeye State to take on the Bobcats of Ohio. 72% of the tickets are on South Alabama. Money's probably about even. 46% of the money is on the Jaguars out of beautiful Mobile, Alabama, as they travel up to Mac Country to take on Ohio. Another game that we're keeping our eye on is the Kansas Jayhawks. Rock Chalk Jayhawk KU getting 73% of the tickets, 76% of the money. That line is dipped down a little bit depending on where you shop. On our big board, it's sitting at a -4.5 consensus. A lot of places still have that line at 5. Jayhawks in this matchup. San Jose State versus the Air Force Academy. Folks, that line opened with Air Force as a 6.5 point favorite. Touch 7 briefly. That line is now down to Air Force as a 3.5 point favorite there in beautiful Colorado Springs. The Aztecs come in with 69% of the tickets, 44% of the money. Keep an eye out on this contest as well. A couple of more quick games before we get out of here. Georgia Southern, basically in a pick 'em as a 1 point dog there to Nevada as they head out to beautiful Reno, Nevada. 76% of the money is on Nevada. 66% of the 76% of the tickets are on Nevada. 66% of the money is on Nevada. Yet that line continues to drop down. Folks, somebody out there in the desert is thinking Georgia Southern can not only cover but win this game outright. Another game we're looking at, the Tulsa Hurricanes traveling to Arkansas State to take on Butch Jones. Arkansas State, a 8 point favorite, getting 55% of the tickets, but only 33% of the money. Might take a look at that game at +8 there. A game that, while from a betting standpoint, we're not really focused on, but DJ Lagway will make his first start there for the Florida Gators as Graham Mertz was knocked out of that game against Miami with a concussion. He's out this week. Florida Gators, a 37 point favorite against the Bulldogs of Sanford out of Birmingham, Alabama. 72% of the tickets are on the Gators, 68% of the money. Florida should win this game. The cover will be in play. You're talking about a 5 touchdown plus to get that cover. Do you really trust Florida to put together that kind of performance here later on today? And then finally, a game that we're going to keep very close tabs on, App State versus Clemson. We know the drubbing that Clemson just came off of last week versus the Georgia Bulldogs. Folks, that line opened with Clemson as an 18 point favorite. It is now dipped below the key number of 17. That number on a consensus board is Clemson, a 16.5 point favorite. 35% of the tickets are on Clemson. 60% of the money is on Clemson, yet that number is below that key number. Something to take a look out for later on today. And then the final game that we're going to touch on, the Mississippi State Bulldogs will travel out to the desert to face the Arizona State Sun Devils. Folks, Arizona State opened as a 6.5 point favorite in this contest. That line is now down to 5 on the consensus. 64% of the tickets are on Arizona State, but Mississippi State is getting 53% of the money in this contest. Folks, want to say thank you to my amazing team here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Summer, our co-host, she's on assignment. Jessica, she's also on assignment this week. And Billy, this is Kenneth getting ready to sign off. Please like, subscribe, and review the podcast. You can find us on iTunes and Spotify. Have a great week 2. Hopefully your favorite team wins. And more importantly, hopefully your bets all get you to the window. Have a great weekend, everybody. And as always, God bless.